August 1970, Criteria Studios, Miami. Eric Clapton was drowning, not literally, but spiritually, consumed by heroin addiction and unrequited love for Pattie Boyd, George Harrison's wife. He'd gathered some of rock's best musicians to record what would become Layla and other assorted love songs, but the sessions were falling apart. Clapton was too high to focus, too heartbroken to lead. That's when producer Tom Dowd made a phone call to Macon, Georgia. "I've got someone you need to meet," Dowd told Clapton. The next day, Duane Allman walked into the studio carrying a Coracetin bottle he used as a slide. Within hours, he'd transformed Clapton's melancholic love song into something transcendent. But more importantly, Duane's presence, his joy, his energy, his pure love of music saved Clapton's life in ways that had nothing to do with guitar. Eric Clapton arrived in Miami in the summer of 1970 as a man coming apart. He'd left Blind Faith, his supergroup with Steve Winwood, feeling like he'd lost his musical direction entirely. Cream had ended badly. The Yardbirds seemed like a lifetime ago. And underneath all the musical confusion was something darker. He was using heroin daily, and he was desperately, hopelessly in love with his best friend's wife. Pattie Boyd was married to George Harrison, Clapton's close friend since the Beatles days. But Eric had fallen for her completely, writing songs about her, thinking about her constantly, knowing it was wrong but unable to stop himself. The pain of wanting someone he couldn't have was destroying him, and heroin was the only thing that dulled it. The band he'd assembled, Derek and the Dominoes, was meant to be different. No egos, no star names, just musicians making music. Bobby Whitlock on keyboards, Carl Radle on bass, Jim Gordon on drums, and Clapton on guitar and vocals. They were talented, but they were also all addicts to varying degrees, and the sessions reflected that chaos. Tom Dowd, the legendary producer who'd worked with everyone from Ray Charles to the Allman Brothers, was watching it fall apart. Clapton would show up late, so high he could barely hold his guitar. When he did play, it was competent but lifeless. The songs existed, but they had no soul. One song in particular worried Dowd. Clapton had written it about Pattie, inspired by the Persian love story Layla and Majnun, about a man driven mad by unrequited love. The lyrics were raw, desperate, painful, but musically it wasn't working. The band would play through it, and it sounded like a sad man singing sad words over sad music. There was no release, no catharsis, no transcendence. Dowd had been producing the Allman Brothers Band's records in the same studio complex. He'd watched Duane Allman, the group's lead guitarist and slide master, transform songs with his playing. Duane had this quality that Dowd had rarely encountered, pure, uncomplicated joy in making music. He didn't play guitar to impress people or work out his demons. He played because it made him happy, and that happiness was contagious. "I'm bringing someone by tomorrow," Dowd told Clapton one evening after another frustrating session. "I think he can help." Clapton, foggy from heroin, just nodded. He'd lost the ability to care much about anything. Duane Allman arrived the next day like a force of nature. At 23, he was 5 years younger than Clapton, but seemed much younger, enthusiastic, energetic, wearing bright colors and carrying his Gibson Les Paul and his signature slide, a glass Coracetin medicine bottle. The Coracetin bottle was distinctive. Most slide players used metal or glass, but Duane had found that this specific medicine bottle, which contained cold medicine, had the perfect weight and length. He'd worn it smooth through years of playing, and the tone it produced was unlike anything else. Warm but cutting, crying but singing, somehow both mournful and joyful simultaneously.
"Tom says you're making some music," Duane said to Clapton, his Georgia accent thick and friendly. "Mind if I sit in?" Clapton looked at this kid, because that's what Duane seemed like, a kid, and felt a mixture of skepticism and indifference. But Dowd nodded encouragingly, so Clapton shrugged. "Sure, we're working on this song called Layla." They played through it once, with Duane just listening, getting a feel for the structure. It was in the same key as the previous attempts, melancholic, slow, heavy with Clapton's heartbreak. When they finished, Duane nodded thoughtfully. "That's beautiful, man. Really beautiful. But can I try something?" Duane didn't wait for permission. He put the Coricidin bottle on his ring finger, positioned his Les Paul, and started playing a riff that seemed to come from somewhere else entirely. It wasn't sad. It wasn't slow. It was urgent, passionate, almost joyful in its intensity. The riff climbed and fell, answering itself, creating tension and releasing it. It was the same chord progression Clapton had written, but Duane's approach transformed it from a song about pain into a song about passion underneath the pain. Clapton, who'd been sitting passively, suddenly sat up straighter. He grabbed his guitar and started playing rhythm behind Duane's lead, feeding off that energy. Bobby Whitlock jumped in on organ, following Duane's lead. Jim Gordon's drums picked up intensity. Carl Rattle's bass locked in. Suddenly, the song was alive. They played for 20 minutes straight, just jamming on those chord changes, Duane's slide guitar crying and singing over the top of everything. His playing had this quality of controlled abandon, technically precise, but emotionally uninhibited. He wasn't afraid to hit wrong notes, because wrong notes could lead to right notes. He wasn't precious about perfection. He was committed to feeling. When they finally stopped, everyone in the studio was energized in a way they hadn't been since the session started. Clapton looked at Duane with something like wonder. Where did that come from? "I don't know, man," Duane said, grinning. "I just felt it. Your song's got all this pain in it, right? But pain is just passion with nowhere to go, so I tried to give it somewhere to go." Over the next few days, Duane became a fixture at the sessions. He wasn't officially part of Derek and the Dominoes. He still had commitments with the Allman Brothers, but whenever he could get away, he'd drive over to Criteria Studios and play. His presence changed everything, not just musically, though that was significant. Duane's attitude toward music was infectious. Where Clapton was drowning in misery and heroin, Duane was surfing on pure joy. He'd walk into the studio excited about what they might create that day. He'd encourage other musicians, compliment their parts, build them up. He had no ego about anything except making the best music possible. "Man, that chord change is beautiful," Duane would say to Bobby Whitlock. "Do that again." "That fill was perfect," he'd tell Jim Gordon, "right in the pocket." To Clapton, he was especially generous. "Your vocal on that take was incredible, Eric. Really felt it." At first, Clapton was suspicious. Nobody was this positive all the time. But gradually, he realized Duane wasn't faking it. He genuinely loved making music, loved collaborating, loved the process of creation. And that love was in stark contrast to Clapton's approach, which had become about using music to process pain, to escape reality, to cry out his hopeless love for Pattie Boyd. The iconic guitar riff that opens the recorded version of the song, that urgent climbing passage that everyone recognizes instantly, was Duane's creation. He'd come up with it during one of the jam sessions, and Clapton immediately recognized it as the perfect introduction. It announced the song's intensity before the vocals even started.
But even more significant was the extended instrumental section in the middle of the song, what would become the piano coda section. Jim Gordon had written a piano piece, and when they were trying to figure out how to incorporate it, Duane's slide guitar transformed it from a separate composition into an emotional resolution to Clapton's opening cry of pain. Over Dowd's piano chords in that section, Duane played some of the most emotionally resonant slide guitar ever recorded. It didn't sound like technique. It sounded like a conversation, like the guitar was responding to Clapton's earlier vocals, offering comfort, understanding, hope. The slide would climb up, cry out, then descend with something like acceptance. During one take of that section, Clapton stood in the control room listening to Duane play and felt something break inside him. Not break down, break open. For months he'd been trapped in his misery, using heroin to numb it, writing songs to express it, but never actually processing it. Duane's playing somehow gave Clapton's pain context, made it part of something larger than just his personal suffering. After that take, Clapton walked into the studio where Duane was still holding his Les Paul, the Coricidin bottle still on his finger. "How do you do that?" Clapton asked. "Do what?" "Make sadness sound hopeful, make pain sound beautiful." Duane thought about it. "I guess because I don't think pain is the end of the story. It's just part of the story. Your song is about this love you can't have, right? That's real and it hurts. But the fact that you can feel love that strong, that's beautiful, man, even if it hurts." It was a simple observation, but it hit Clapton hard. He'd been so focused on the impossibility of his love for Patty that he'd forgotten to see the love itself as something valuable, something that made him more human rather than less. "You're saving this album," Clapton said. "You know that, right?" "We're making it together," Duane corrected. "That's the thing about music, Eric. It's not about one person being the genius. It's about people bringing what they have and creating something bigger than any of them could alone." The album sessions continued through August and into September. Duane couldn't be there every day. The Allman Brothers had their own touring schedule. But whenever he could make it, he'd show up. His slide guitar appeared on several tracks beyond the main song, and each time his presence elevated the music from good to transcendent. But more than his guitar playing, Duane's friendship was saving Clapton's life. Not in a dramatic intervention way. Duane wasn't lecturing Eric about heroin use or telling him to get clean. But his presence was a reminder that joy still existed, that music could be about creation rather than destruction, that collaboration was possible even when you felt completely isolated. One night, after a particularly good session, Clapton and Duane sat outside the studio watching the Miami sunset.
"I don't know how to thank you," Clapton said. "You didn't have to help with this record. You've got your own thing with the brothers." "Man, this is music," Duane said simply. "This is what we do. When someone's making something beautiful, you help if you can. That's all there is." "But the song, Layla, that's going to be the one people remember. And the part they'll remember is your slide guitar. Your playing made it what it is." Duane shrugged. "It's your song, Eric. Your heartbreak, your story. I just helped you tell it. That's what slide guitar is for, helping the song say what words alone can't." When the album was released later that year, Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs by Derek and the Dominoes, Clapton insisted that Duane Allman be credited prominently as a guest musician. But very few people outside the music industry knew who Duane Allman was. The album didn't sell well initially. The single didn't chart. It seemed like another Clapton project that would be remembered by fans but forgotten by history. Then, on October 29, 1971, just over a year after those Miami sessions, Duane Allman crashed his motorcycle in Macon, Georgia. He was 24 years old. The slide guitarist who'd saved Clapton's album and in many ways saved Clapton's spirit was gone. Clapton was devastated. The loss hit him harder than he expected. He'd only known Duane for those few weeks in Miami, plus a handful of other encounters, but the connection had been profound. Duane had represented something Clapton desperately needed to see, that it was possible to love music purely without all the ego and pain and addiction that Clapton thought were necessary parts of being an artist. At Duane's funeral, Clapton couldn't speak. He stood silently as other musicians celebrated Duane's life and talent. Barry Oakley, Duane's best friend and the Allman Brothers' bassist, delivered a eulogy that broke everyone present. The remaining Allman Brothers played Will the Circle Be Unbroken, their voices cracking with grief.
Clapton watched it all through a haze of pain, some from heroin, most from genuine loss. What haunted him was the terrible irony. Duane, who loved life so purely, who brought joy to every room he entered, who saw beauty in everything, was gone at 24. Meanwhile, Clapton, who'd been actively trying to kill himself slowly with heroin, who could barely find reasons to get out of bed, who'd lost his love for music entirely before Duane reminded him it existed, was still alive. The guilt of survival mixed with the grief of loss. Clapton kept thinking about those Miami sessions, about Duane's laugh, about the way he'd say, "That's beautiful, man," whenever someone played something good, about how Duane had never once mentioned Clapton's heroin use, never judged, just kept showing up with that Cora-Sidon bottle and that infectious enthusiasm. In the years after Duane's death, something unexpected happened. The song Layla began finding its audience. Radio stations started playing it. New fans discovered the album. By the mid-1970s, it was recognized as a classic. And as it grew in stature, Clapton made sure everyone knew the guitar playing that made Layla immortal wasn't just him, it was Duane Allman.
In interviews for decades afterward, Clapton would talk about those Miami sessions with reverence. Duane saved that album, he'd say. More than that, he saved me. He showed me that music could be joyful even when you're in pain. That collaboration could be about lifting each other up instead of competing. Clapton kept that lesson for the rest of his career. His later work, more collaborative and less ego-driven, reflected what Duane had taught him in those few weeks. And whenever someone praised Clapton's guitar work, especially his slide playing, he'd mention Duane. "I learned from the best," he'd say, and he was 23 years old. The Cora-Sidon bottle, Duane's signature slide, became iconic among guitarists. Every slide player knew about it. Some tried to replicate the sound using similar bottles, but nobody could capture what Duane had, because it wasn't just the bottle, it was the joy he brought to playing it. Eric Clapton would live another 50 years after Duane's death. He'd have massive success, win countless awards, be recognized as one of the greatest guitarists in history. But he never forgot that summer in Miami when a 23-year-old kid with a medicine bottle on his finger transformed his song about pain into something transcendent. Layla became one of rock's most enduring songs. The opening riff is instantly recognizable. The extended instrumental section with that crying slide guitar is considered one of music's most beautiful passages. And every time someone hears it, they're hearing the collaboration between a man drowning in darkness and a young musician who brought light. Duane Allman didn't save Eric Clapton's life in any melodramatic way, but he reminded Clapton why life was worth living. He showed him that music could be about joy and collaboration instead of pain and isolation. That genius wasn't about individual brilliance, but about people combining their gifts to create something none could achieve alone. That's the real story, not about who played which notes or who deserves credit, but about how sometimes, when you're drowning in darkness that feels permanent and inescapable, someone shows up with nothing but a glass bottle and a smile and reminds you that beauty still exists in the world.